Hey, this is Trey. Thank you for joining us for another Tuesdays with Trey. I like talking to interesting people. You've heard me say that before. This week is no exception. Mo Elleithee is on television, so you may have seen him, but he is, more importantly, the executive director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. He's worked in and around campaigns and elections. He has a particular expertise or emphasis or interest in communications. I like listening to him because he's thoughtful and he makes an effort to listen when the other side is talking and try to understand where they're coming from, which is smart advocacy. And recently I had the pleasure of joining him at Georgetown for a wonderful evening. Mo, thank you for hosting us. It was flawless. And I hope, if anybody backs out at the last minute in the future, I'll be your 8th or 9th choice then too.
No, Trey, it's a pleasure to be here. It was a pleasure to host you on campus. I was joking with someone right after our event. Given when I was working in Democratic politics, given the number of press releases I wrote attacking you, if you had told me that we would one day be friends, we'd be sharing a stage at Georgetown, we'd be having a friendly chat on your podcast, I'd have thought you were smoking something. So that's one of the beauties of your and my post-political lives, is we can find some religion and get to know one another and people on the opposite side.
Mo, I am sure I gave you plenty of ammunition. You could have written books, not press releases.
I think we probably did.
Okay. That makes me, I'm so happy I was able to help you. All right, I want to start. Before you got where, I read about you and I learned things that I did not already know. We've been on panels together. That's when I first you have the courage to go on Fox News, which in the environment we're in right now, the easy thing to do, Mo, is to say no. That's the easy thing to do. But that's where I first kind of thought, we may not agree on things, but he has a thoughtful approach to himself and he has a very pleasant manner of communication. Where'd that come from? Tell us about Mo Elleithee growing up.
Well, I am the son of immigrants. Both of my parents came to the United States from Egypt and grew up in Arizona. I sort of became, both of my parents were, when I was growing up, Republican. They were not particularly political. And for some reason, I was. I think maybe out of defiance or rebellion, became a Democrat very early in my life. But growing up in Arizona in sort of the 80s, 90s, growing up in Arizona to living in a Republican home in a Republican neighborhood, I kind of had to learn fairly early how to talk across the aisle, right? And so that's just what I did. I left to come to school at Georgetown. Wasn't planning to go into politics. I came to Georgetown to go into the Foreign Service. I wanted to be a diplomat. And again, it was sort of that idea of being able to sit down and talk about things and negotiate things and find solutions to things that excited me. The people who wrote the Foreign Service exam apparently had different plans for me. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I'd always been politically interested. I'd always volunteered on campaigns. Was involved in College Democrats at Georgetown. I was here as a student when Bill Clinton, another Georgetown alum, was elected to the presidency, and that campaign sort of electrified a lot of us and inspired a lot of us to find our callings in public service. So when I didn't get into the Foreign Service, I decided, maybe politics was a place for me. And so I started working on campaigns and never stopped.
Well, you've told me something I did not know. I should have known that. So, you must be pretty smart You got in Georgetown. That is a hard school to get into.
I don't know that I could get in today.
Well, you got in when you needed to get in, but there's a separate exam for foreign service that you have to score particularly well on, or else you don't make it.
If you want to be in the diplomatic corps, you have to pass an exam, and there's an intense written exam. If you pass that, then there's an 8-hour-long oral exam. And if you pass that, then you go through security clearance, and then you're in the queue. And if a spot opens up during a set period of time, you're in. First time I took the exam, I failed. Second time I took the exam, I passed the written, but I failed the oral. The next year, they canceled the exam altogether because there were too many people in the queue. And I actually got in on my fourth try. I actually got in. But I was having so much fun doing politics that I actually turned them down.
Little did you know that if you just donated to the right campaign, you could be an ambassador. You didn't have to do any of that.
Well, the funny thing is when, later on in my career, I worked for Hillary Clinton and her first presidential campaign. And she went on to become obviously Secretary of State. And I reached out to folks and I was like, maybe this is my shot to finally go to work at the State Department. And I still have so much interest in global affairs and international affairs. And I think it's increasingly more important. But I have no regrets. The path I took in public service has been very, very fulfilling to me.
I'm trying to think. I don't follow politics as closely as I should have. I'm trying to think of who else was seeking the Democrat nomination when she ran the first time.
Yeah, it was this guy who I think he did all right. I got to tell you, being a part of that campaign between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, that Democratic primary, talk about having a front row seat to history. That was one of the most exciting, most energizing campaigns I've ever witnessed. And I was fortunate. I was her traveling press secretary. So I got to travel around the country with her on her plane. And it was one of those rare primaries, Trey, I think you'll appreciate this, that actually made the party better by the end of it. These were two candidates that electrified the party. It was a hard fought, sometimes brass knuckle primary. And to this day, there's some residual animosity between their two staffs. But the party came out stronger. It both tactically, strategically, from a messaging perspective. And it was just historic on so many levels. That was, even though I ended up on the wrong side of that primary, the losing side of that primary, I would do it again in a heartbeat because she was an amazing person to work with. And he was an amazing adversary. To see the United States, to see our politics sort of turn a major corner in that. We were about to make history nominating one of the two of them. We were going to make history. And I'm so proud to have been played a small part in it.
Mo, in some ways that was yesterday in the grand scheme of things. And in other ways, it feels like it was forever ago. Has politics changed since then? And in what ways, if you were talking to someone who wasn't around for that race, you would say things are different now in this way?
Gosh, how much time do we have? It is, we have changed and our politics have changed. I mean, think about this. The iPhone was released in the middle of that campaign. There were no smartphones before that campaign. The way we communicate, the way we share information, the way we internalize information today is so different than it was in 2007, 2008, when that campaign was underway. The speed at which we move and communicate and share information, right? Twitter wasn't a thing until after that campaign. It wasn't a thing in politics until after that thing. Now Twitter tends to drive our political dialogue.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.